Our first story deals with a subculture of heavy metal music that some feel is sending a dangerous message to your kids.
The forces of evil on the dark side of devil rock.
And I want to talk tonight about the devil and demons and witches and wizards.
And we just mix it up with hardcore and aggression and come out with something we think's an original sound.
Loud, fast, heavy, you know.
Well, what do you got?
What do you got?
You're listening to Riff Worship, the podcast that attempts to answer the age-old question, what makes a riff? Why do we love all things the riff? I'm one of your hosts, Austin Paulson. With me, as always, is the beautiful, dashing, bald, very bald, Dylan Adams. Dylan, how are you?
You know, I'm not doing so bad, man. You know, somebody once told me one time it's better to wake up smelling like fucked buttholes rather than not smelling like fucked buttholes. So doing pretty good.
Yeah, was that Socrates or what was that?
No. That's Ulysses S. Grant, something like that. One of those philosophers, I'm sure.
The last time we met, we were kind of gearing up for some shows that we were going to attend.
We
so I guess
sure were.
I want to ask you to kind of, before we get into the steak and potatoes of this episode, how was the show? How was Cannibal?
You know, I'm going to get into our illustrious third host that is so adamant about our definitive statements we make on here, primarily mine. There are many great death metal bands out there. There always will be. But the best is Cannibal Corpse. Hands down. If not, it's definitely the tightest death metal band live, but one of the tightest live bands I've ever seen in my life. No matter how many times I've seen them, and this would have been my fifth time.
Damn.
They can hit it out of the park. They open up with maybe a later era hit, and they can just keep moving. There is no end to that band. This is also the largest venue I've ever seen them in. It was packed. I don't know if it was sold out. Show was good though, man. A lot of like younger kids dressed up in like corpse paint and stuff for like Mayhem.
Really?
It was fucking wild.
Wow.
Mayhem, Gorguts is a great band. That was the first time they'd ever played Nashville. And Blood Incantation played for 30 minutes, which is remarkable because we both know that their songs are like 10 to 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
So they start playing before we get in and they're done by the next song. And I remember our friend Matt was like, that is? I was like, oh yeah, that's 2 songs. That's 30 minutes. We're good. It was fun. The merch, this is the first Cannibal show. I don't think I've ever bought anything from them just because the merch line was all the way around the venue.
I'm so happy to hear that they, I mean, it's Cannibal, right? Like there's so much and so little that can be said at the same, where it's like, if you know, but I'm so glad to hear. Cause like the last time, as you mentioned, I think the last time I saw them, we saw them in like a sports bar, like in Memphis.
Saw them in Memphis.
Yes.
Which is probably the worst venue I've ever been to. I apologize to anybody that lives in Memphis that may be listening to this. They have great shows there. I am just a stickler for how it sounds.
I'll probably bleep that out, but you can only assume if you've been there before, you could probably guess what we're talking about. But yeah, that was unfortunate. It was a Harm's Way and Hate Eternal tour.
Yeah. Talk about foreshadowing there, bud.
Oh man, yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that. Yeah, I want to say Cannibal will be coming through my neck of the woods fairly close. They're going to be in Gary with that tour. But I also went to a show. It was incredible. I got to see
the
mighty Crowbar. They played the heavy one.
They played the heavy one.
They played the heavy one for me.
That is a lofty statement too, especially coming from that band's catalog and the band that was direct support.
They sounded great. They sounded fantastic. Everybody sounded great. I went. Friend John Hoffman was opening in his kind of duo sludge doom project that he's been working on for the past few years called Stomach. Just got there early. I kind of spent the day in the city. I went to there's a coffee shop I love. You've been there, I believe. The Brood.
No, I haven't.
You haven't. So I've taken everybody else but you.
Yeah.
So next time you come up, we'll have to go. But it's, essentially B horror and coffee. I mean, both things that
Perfect.
I truly enjoy coming together finally at last. Spent some time there, got some grease in me, and then headed over to the show. And yeah, man, that Stomach played great. Then Body Box, who I was not familiar with, kind of like a death metal,
$20
hardcore
band,
influence. Right? I think so.
Or Maggot Stomp, maybe. One of those two.
I would believe both, but probably more Maggot Stomp than anything. Yeah, heck yeah, represent. Maggot Stomp. They played great. And then we had Primitive Man, which, again, I did this last time I saw Primitive Man, where I forgot to bring earplugs.
Yeah.
And they were so great. They watched it. They walked out to, I'm not Italian and I am not.
Pagliacci.
Yes. This sad clown music, sad clown opera. They walked out and I started tearing up.
Romano.
No one will get that joke.
It doesn't. 2 people will, and it's fine.
They walked out to Pagliacci and yeah, then they just blew the doors off the place. Cause I mean, they had like Castello amps, they had orange amps, they had, just a ton of
noisemakers.
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain I've seen them twice now.
Yeah.
Surely I
saw them at the end years ago. I saw Vermin Womb last year in the same venue at Reggie's. And
I'll have to check. I may be wrong. I may have only seen them once. I saw them open for Blood Incantation a couple years back and made the same mistake that you did and went in with no hearing protection at all. And it was that I felt that for the next 2 days. It was absolute misery, which I'm sure is what they want.
They played great. And then to kind of, just round out the entire evening with Crowbar, they sounded amazing. And they played all my favorite songs. They played, I Feel the Burning Sun, which we've talked about on this show before. It was so good. It had been a while since I had seen them. I think the last time I got to see them, they played with High on Fire, and I saw them at the Exit Inn with Swindle. So the first time we saw them, obviously
I've seen them 3 times at this point. Twice with Swindle. No, maybe it's only been twice. I've seen them both times with Swindle. And that second time was with you. So, I mean, that's been, God, you were like 21.
Yep.
At that
I
point.
just turned 21 that week. Yeah. And now I'm 75.
75. Because I'm 160.
And Swindle's 270. So, crazy.
Yes. We don't even, he's like a tree. You count the rings.
Cut him open.
At this point, just cut them open, count the rings. Yeah, I believe that tour is hitting our neck of the woods here in the next little while. I think our mutual friend Matt Graham, who has become a member of Chicago in his own right, and I are going to have a tough decision to make that day. It's either see Crowbar and Primitive Man, or it's see Revocation. So we've got to figure out who we're going to see. Same day. So we may have to make a really tough decision there. It's going to be like a coin flip.
Well, I hope you guys figure it out. But until then, we've got some albums to talk about. We've spent a lot of time talking about Cattle, and this episode is going to be no different. But it is going to be our final installation of talking about this just massive, prolific discography. The last 2 albums, the most recent, beginning with Death Atlas, and then a record that came out this past May, Terrasite.
Yep.
I think really just to kind of start things off, I think perhaps these are, we've kind of talked about it a little bit leading up to this episode, this final part in the series, but they've only gotten better over time. And I really do find that that is true. In that both of these albums are probably my favorite. Death Atlas is probably my favorite. If I had to pick between the two, I don't really want to, but if I had to pick, Death Atlas is definitely my favorite record in the discography. And I think maybe you feel the same way, but Terrasite's probably right under it.
The more I listen to that record, the more and more acquainted I get with it. And although these records were released 4 years apart, it almost feels like A and B, right?
Yeah.
Almost feels like two sums of the same whole because of everything that happened with Death Atlas, or what didn't happen. But I still firmly believe that if you wanted somebody to get into this band, the two records you hand them are going to be, although I would even maybe toss in a third one in there after, going back through the catalog. You'd hand them the Harvest Floor, Death Atlas, and I would even say you hand them Monolith. You hand them those three and go, here's the culmination of what this band is going to sound like in all three eras. Hand them those, let them figure out if they want to go further. Because as we know, you and I are both fans of Karma Bloody Karma. Anthropocene is a massive, and massively depressing sounding album. Not to say what we're talking about today is any different.
Yeah.
I mean, we've both got some stories. But these two albums, I would hedge a bet. This may be one of my favorite death metal albums of all time. Is Death Atlas. It was for sure. I don't do end of the year list, or I haven't done them in quite some time. But in 2019, this definitely was like top-notch album for me of 2019. I mean, I distinctly remember pre-ordering this record because the pre-orders came out I think the pre-orders came out. They had started talking about it months before the album pre-orders came out. And then the pre-orders came out during the busiest season of where I work. And I remember dodging out into like a janitorial closet, like hiding away, like phones ringing off the hook. I'm like, just refreshing because it's almost 9 a.m. Like, I got to get it. And I think my variant of the record is the Lava Vomit pressing, which matches title. The artwork really well. I mean, go for it. I think, I have the Death Atlas shirt on at this point. Like, it's just got the album cover on. And that was happenstance. It's just something I grabbed out of the closet. But it is a great record for many reasons that we're about to dig into.
Yeah, let's I guess we kind of left off with, the end of like talking about the Anthropocene extinction. The band still really just touring as hard as ever. We actually got to see them post that record in 2017. We saw them with Full of Hell, Revocation, as well as Artificial Brain. We drove up to Covington, Kentucky at a little venue called Madison Live. Very kind of, it's kind of set up almost seems like a hallway. But one of my favorite shows. I was so happy to have seen all of those bands. It was really just a stacked lineup, and they killed it. I mean, to see some of those songs performed live, really, really just hit home for me. There is a tour documentary that you can see on YouTube where they're in Europe, and it almost just seems like a bunch of guys really just having the time of their lives. And the video is also edited and filmed in that way. They kind of recreate a scenario where, they drop some like components of their scrim and, whatever.
It's essentially PVC pipe. They drop down into like this canal and it's gone. But it's the fact of like, they're in Europe. How do you explain there's no Lowe's, there's no Home Depot, there's no hardware store. How do you explain like in whatever European country, like, hey man, we need this stuff. I actually believe in that video, there's a point where there's a discussion of, are we going to do an encore? And I think Travis Ryan's in the shower and he just trolls out of the shower, puts on blue jeans while he's still wet, goes back out, like boots unlaced, everything, just hits the stage again.
It's a fun watch for sure. And I kind of mentioned this in the last episode as well, where the band had toured hard pretty much from the time that record came out to, leading up into this record. I want to say they even headlined a Summer Slaughter tour, perhaps when the album had been announced, and maybe they got to play some of that stuff live in 2019.
I believe you're right, and that might have actually have been the very last Summer Slaughter tour.
Wow, because you have
There has not been one since then.
I had no idea. I never actually attended that tour.
I haven't either.
But I do know they had been like at least featured on that Summer Slaughter a few times.
They played the very first one.
The very first one. So now you play the very last one. If that, I believe that's correct.
That's a tour that I hope we see again, because it did help usher a lot of younger people into kind of extreme music. Especially with the kind of crowd extreme music has now. It would be nice to see a tour like that pop up, because you get this kind of stacked bill with like 8 to 9 bands. Like, yeah, that can be daunting, but it would be nice to see something like that again.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think of this lineup. I mean, at the time, this totally makes sense to me. Carnifex, The Faceless. Then you have support by Rivers of Nile, Lorna Shore, Brand of Sacrifice. I think Necrogoblicon is on that tour as well. But yeah, that was essentially, that was the lineup. And I think they were able to play some of those songs and get people excited. But the first single that really gets released for this record is a fantastic introduction to like maybe what was to come, and perhaps what you heard pre-ordering the record. But One Day Closer to the End of the World. I think that is a very good representation of what the themes that you have on this record kind of going into it. It is a bleak, I mean, not to say that the records that came before it aren't bleak. They definitely are. When
I heard that single, I didn't know what to think, because it is so vastly different than the two albums prior to it. Structure wise, song wise, instrumentation wise, it's different. You hear the distinct you hear a distinct chorus, and it's a repeated chorus. It's done a couple times over. I've also never heard the band do those, the French band Gojira is primarily known for that technique, which is this weird pick scrape thing into the riff, which is how the song starts. It starts with that pick scrape into this like kind of grooved out riff. But it's a hell of a track to start out on as your debut like released single, if those truly exist at this point anymore. And it's a wild song to kind of start out on.
I think kind of what I touched on with theme too. I think this is the most, you have like, certainly with the previous record, Monolith as well, you have a lot of this atmosphere being created. You have a theme for the record of like kind of flipping the tables on mankind. And I want to say that this record, Death Atlas, is certainly their most, it feels like their most realized version of that. I feel like the other records that came before are certainly effective and impactful in what they're trying to get across. But this one, I mean, it feels like a movie, and it kind of opens like a movie too. I don't know if it reminded you of anything in particular. I think if people heard you in the beginning of the episode, they probably got it, but it does sound like T2, man.
As you said, each of the two preceding albums had a loose concept. Not necessarily in the whole album format, but it had a loose concept of, here are things we should be doing. Here's what we're seeing. Whereas this one definitely feels and looks and listens like a fully realized concept album. Although I don't think it's a concept record.
Yeah.
I just think thematic wise, each song just happened to flow into it. There's a big theme of fire on this whole album. I mean, and the whole record is just, the artwork has fire on it. I mean, they were really pushing with some of the pre-orders about, like I said, my vinyl variant's a Lava Vomit. Variant. Like, there's a lot of aspects of fire on this. This is a really good way for us to kind of touch on the artwork. Obviously, it's a Wes Benscoter piece again, but it's the first Wes Benscoter piece they've done that is an actual painting.
Right. Everything else is pretty rooted in realism, hyper-realistic photos. There's a lot of different mediums that are typically being mixed when you see a Wes Benscoter artwork piece for Cattle. And this is essentially the first one that is painted. And from what I understand, Travis had this idea, this image in his head for a few years leading up to this record, and then the title for it came pretty naturally. But I think this is perhaps one of my favorite album artworks by the band. I mean, not to say that the other ones aren't creative, they're not innovative, but I think it makes such a good. It's a great statement. It's a great piece. It fits so well with this record, and that's kind of part of the reason why it is my favorite, because you see that album cover, you're instantly drawn in, and I have to know more. So I mean, really, it's a space record. To me also, it's kind of a space record, and
I could see that.
When I hear it, some of the atmosphere and some of the pieces, it almost feels like, to me, when I hear it, it's like a big space station kind of coasting through, the universe, and you kind of come across perhaps this message that was sent out by
I am Jean-Luc Picard.
When you hear the first song, when I initially heard this first kind of introduction to the record. Obviously, if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, you know that usually the Cattle records start with some sort of introduction, whether it be atmosphere, whether it be very unsettling, like animals in pain, whatever. This starts with kind of a multitude of samples. And so I didn't really know what this was until I really did research for it. But this is sampled. What they did was sampled a record. It's the Greetings in 55 Languages from the Voyager Golden Records. And so you basically have two phonograph records. One of each were included on the two Voyager spacecraft that were launched in 1977. And so they contain sounds, images that basically kind of encapsulate life on Earth. And so I think maybe Jimmy Carter sent this out. I think Carl Sagan even worked on it just to kind of tie the whole thing together. But the quote was, "This is a present from our small, distant world, a token of our sounds, our science, our images, our music, our thoughts, and our feelings. We are attempting to survive our time so we may live in yours." Which, at first glance, when you see something like that, it's kind of endearing, right? You're like, wow, that's so cool. We're trying to maybe kind of reach out and maybe shake the world and just like introduce ourselves, or maybe like kind of wow, we're like this small little planet, we're trying to make things happen. I feel like Cattle would have the reverse thought. They would be like, wow, how dare us think we are like so much bigger, that our thing, our way of life is like it's so important that everyone else should need to know what we're about.
Have you ever seen Mars Attack?
Yes.
Okay. You know the scene when the Oval Office is down there, all of our politicians, the aliens descend, and the dove is released.
Yes.
As like a sign of peace.
Yeah.
That's this.
Yep.
That's all that this is.
Yep.
That is 100% is. We're going to get into the tracks for sure. But what we're touching on too is just how the ignorance of the human world to think how full of our own shit we could be by sending this message to whatever life is out there that we know is true now, that we would feel so full of ourselves to go, oh yeah, we've taken care of our world so well that we're just now going to come and take care of yours the same way. And it just goes along with the overall theme, the concept, purging. We're essentially just going to purge ourselves away. And it's climate change, cruelty, methane, the ozone layer is disappearing. It's very funny to think that this album came out around Black Friday of 2019 with no idea of what we had coming in the next 3 months.
Right. Well, and we'll certainly get on that because they've, if you're familiar at all with this record, you're probably familiar with one of the biggest tracks from the record, or at least one that, kind of sticks out in people's mind. It does this a little bit too with some of these atmospheric pieces that transition so nicely. And that's why it does feel very cinematic. It does feel like there's a theme. It's like I'm watching a movie. Maybe it's not like a story from start to finish, but there are
intermissions.
Yes, they're perfect. And
they're split up. There's like 4 of them, aren't there?
Yeah. So there's like the Great Dying, of course, parts 1 and 2. That kind of reminded me of, and I had to pull it up because I could not remember for the life of me what the name of the track was. But there is the debut Metal Church record, Metal Church by Metal Church. There's an opening on that album called Beyond the Black that starts out very, very similar, where it's like these aliens are like, like the human race is like, fuck the whole world up. So we're just going to take it for its resources because clearly they don't know what the hell they're doing. I love it. It's kind of a weird opening to that Metal Church record, in my opinion, but it's kind of like a B movie, and I love going back to it.
I voted for Kodos.
Let's get into the first song. This is it starts out just how you would think. There's a hit and a single drum hit and then an explosion of
fucking straight
sound.
In.
Yes.
The Geocide.
What a song from the instrumentation that is occurring here. Super, super, super fast. But my favorite thing might be the chorus at the end. But I'm sure you want to get into this a little bit before we get to the kind of outro of the song.
So what I did for this album and Terrasite in particular is what is vastly different from what I've done with a lot of records we've touched on is I listened to them, and these albums are relatively on the longer side. I think this one's 53 and I believe Terrasite is 55 minutes. They're around the same length, but these albums play almost like, a cinematic, piece. So I listened to them, and the first thing that would come to mind, I would just put my descriptor. This song starts out with, as you said, the drum hit, and it's just pure blast immediately after that with this almost circular kind of melody that just keeps going on that the guitars are interchanging with. I think it seems like keyboard, but I think it's EBow.
Okay.
Which is I don't know if you're familiar with an EBow. I'm sure you are. It's a magnetic tool that you can use over a string that will cause the string to resonate, and it adds this weird kind of like tonal sound to it. The big factor on this record that I didn't hear in any of the prior records is the bass really stands out on this record a lot. That being the addition of Ollie Pinard, who has played in multiple technical death metal bands, primarily Cryptopsy, which we've talked about before.
Still in Cryptopsy to this day.
Still in Cryptopsy.
On the latest record.
Yep. Great bass player. I think arguably the best bass player this band has had, technique wise, but a great fit. And they've essentially let him do whatever he wanted on this record because he sounds so good and he's so forefront, and the bass does some really creative things, not just in this track, but on the rest of the record.
Yep.
But this track, this album feels like one giant rhythm section. It's just moving through like a steamroller. Like the way the riffs are structured, the way the parts are structured, it's like everything follows that path for a reason, and we don't deviate from that, although there are flourishes here and there.
Yeah.
This thing's got these huge, big, sustained, like, chords, these doomy sounding chords for like the vocals to just like do everything on top of it. The vocal delivery on this thing is venomous. It almost sounds like he's just spitting vitriol the entire time. Shout out the band Vitriol for being one of the most technically blazing bands I've ever heard. And then you get this great ending vocal line, right? That is just repeated. Fuck the future, fuck all mankind. What a fucking way to end first track on the record.
First real song on the record. You just end it with fuck the future. Sorry, you fuck the future.
And it's layered. It does that great like evil thing to where he's got those snotty vocals with those low like gurgling, just like crypt keeping vocals. Again, we've talked about Travis's vocal approach on every record, and it just, the guy's range just is impeccable.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot he can't do. I mean, as low as like the gurgling stuff that we heard on the Harvest Floor, or on Monolith with Projectile Ovulation. He's still doing that on this record, but it's there for a reason. It's not just there for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, and it's used in practically every. Whereas like the other records, maybe there was a little hint of it. Maybe it was used more so on Monolith and the Anthropocene Extinction. This one, each song pretty much has a line that is dedicated to that vocal delivery, which, you know, I think may have been polarizing to some people. And I feel like that came across in some of the reception after the record. I want to get to that, but I think for me personally, I love that approach. And like you said, I think it showcases his range as a vocalist. It really works for me on this record in particular.
So the next track is where we start to see probably some of that polarizing, some of the polarizing opinions towards the vocal approach on the record happens. I believe this was one of the first tracks maybe released for promotion for the album after Not Bring Back the Play, but One Day Closer. And the vocal line and the melody is interesting.
Yes.
It's very much a throwback to kind of some like goth rock, with the title itself. I distinctly remember reading like YouTube comments of the absolute like scum of the earth. Like there's nothing really positive on any of that shit. But like reading some of like YouTube comments on that thing, just going like, can you get over it? Just listen to the song.
Yeah.
Like just listen to
There's
it.
a lot of that, man. And it bugs me. And I read some of the reviews kind of leading up to this just to see what people's initial thoughts were. And it's like, it's such a stark contrast where people were like, man, this is the best record this band has ever done. And then it's like, man, it's so boring, or like the vocals like really took me out of it. Too much of a good thing. It's like, what are we talking about here? This, I think you put it very, very well in the last episode where you kind of referred to this record as their Black album. And I think you could take that in a lot of ways, where obviously that record's very polarizing, but I mean, it kind of features the band at really some of the best songwriting that they had done. It's different maybe than previous records, but it's what they ultimately wanted to do.
Definitely up to date. This is the band's best songwriting they ever did. I think they did trumpet on Terrasite for sure. There's some, we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
But this track, Be Still Our Bleeding Hearts, has a great melody line. I mean, the traditional songwriting 101 with the name of the track being the chorus. I mean, this track has a menace to it. It has a menacing sound to it when you hear it. There's no comfort in this track. No. It's almost like the preamble of, in my head, when I picture it in a cinematic view, this is where one of the big characters passes on. This is where it's like, all right, something's happened. Obi-Wan's been struck down. Shit is getting real. Sarah Connor's been stabbed or whatever. And then you get the first big vocal hook of the whole fucking record. And there's a lot of those all over this record. And you get it. And it's memorable. This is something that, I mean, you can hum right now. It's a hummable hook, which means it's a good fucking hook. And a lot of the music we're fans of, the hook is generally the riff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Whereas with this band, you get both aspects, which is a great thing. Like, I love Cannibal Corpse. We talked about seeing them. There's not a whole lot of vocal melody to that band, but there are vocal parts you can remember and hum. Sure. But this is a melody.
They have found a way to do exactly that. Whereas, I think what is so endearing about a band like Cannibal Corpse is obviously they have riffs, obviously they have hooks. The vocals, the vocal approach by Corpse Grinder is great because he's audible. Like I can hear every syllable for the most part.
He enunciates.
Enunciation is certainly key, and that it's so easy to kind of hear the lyrical content of what the band is coming up with. And so I often remember a lot of those songs through that because it's audible and it works with it works for that band. Where this band, most death metal, there's not really a vocal melody or a vocal hook. They have found a way to do that. They really worked their asses off in order to kind of transition that into their songwriting. But one thing that you just said that I cannot get out of my skull, the Sarah Connor thing, it definitely feels like this record definitely feels like a lot of time when Sarah Connor's like having her like visions and she gets like looking in the park and she's like, boof.
The theme of fire is just all around this fucking record. I mean, I remember listening to this thing numerous times on the day it released. I remember and just continuously getting images of fire and orange and all of that in my head and getting the album in my hands and like looking at all of it. Even with the Death Atlas video, it's like Pompeii.
Yes.
I mean, there's a theme there, but we're going to get to that track because that is a hell of a track in its own right. But as we're going through the rest of this record, we come to track 4, which is Vulturous. Huge chords at the beginning, huge, massive chords, these low layered vocals, which he's a big fan of. And it adds to those big sustained chords. It makes it sound like the earth is cracking.
Yeah.
Like it makes it sound like it sounds like shit is rattling the way the vocals are on top of those parts. And that's what I want. I do want to say there's a line in there, and obviously I interpret this song being about people that are taking advantage of a lot of things because it has a vocal line that stuck out to me and the lyrics are disgraced by the fucking shit stain. And it is like, and he just says it with so much venom and precision behind it. And it's like, wow, like there are things that I work in a corporate environment. So like there are things in my brain of like, God, this hits close.
I feel like we should mention the bass. I saw some of your notes here. The bass on this song in particular.
The bass is doing some really interesting shit on this song. And it stands out all over the record, but this song in particular, there are points where like the vocals are doing, this really melodic thing and the bass is almost highlighting it. And it's just like, all right, this is a death metal band. Typically the role of a bass player in a death metal band is just to highlight the riffs that are being there, lay a foundation. But when you get to add this type of creativity to what you're playing and you've got the confidence in you as a player to do those things, it's just going to add to the song.
Absolutely.
It's just going to make it cooler. I mean, you've got an OG slam part in this song, which we really haven't seen on the record yet on this record. And there weren't really much of them or many of them on Anthropocene.
And I wonder if it's, obviously we have another person kind of maybe taking care of some of the rhythmic parts of this band that we haven't mentioned yet. Is it
first band is a 2-guitar or first album is a 2-guitar band?
Belisario Demuzio?
I think you nailed it.
So what I found out too, if you watch the 2017 documentary, Belisario is actually the touring guitarist for that 2017 tour, actually. And so I'm assuming that was probably something they were looking at. It's like, well, if this guy's already kind of filling that role, making it a little easier to maybe even for Josh to maybe pay more attention to soloing. You have this very capable guitar player who's going out on tour with us. Maybe it only seems fitting that he should just be welcomed into the fold as their second guitarist. And he does such a wonderful job.
It thickens it up.
Yes.
Again, adding to that, here is this massive rhythm section just moving through. This track also has the first guitar solo on the album.
Yes.
And a really memorable one. There is some Tony Iommi shit going on in the solo. I fully believe he tracked the solos, like he double tracked them, but he also double tracked an alternate take that's layered under it, because if you really listen to it, there's this crazy high harmony on certain parts of the solo, and I'm like, that's what Tony Iommi did on those early Sabbath records, where he doubled it, but it would be playing different parts. This is a hell of a fucking track. This is one of the favorites from the album that I've seen. I've seen a lot of cover videos when kind of digging into this band's catalog, and this is the song that always comes up.
And it's followed up by another kind of, we kind of mentioned it earlier on, but the Great Dying, which it just kind of sets such an atmosphere for the record. There's some narration by Melissa Lucas Harlow, who I found just maybe through doing some research, did some photography for the band on Humanure back in 2004.
That's right.
So it's kind of cool. A very in-house band. They like working with their friends and the people that do good things. So it's always like, it almost seems like it's to me, when you hear it, you have like, I always envisioned like maybe intelligent life forms coming across this sort of recording, and you have like, oh man, well, climate change is fucked up, and it's like kind of giving you like a backstory on how the decline of the human race, essentially, and how they managed to get here. And you have like all of these like little news updates, or this voice kind of telling whoever stumbled across this artifact to, here's what happened, basically. Don't make the same mistakes that we did.
So the way I see these soundscape tracks, or these kind of intermission tracks in between, is it splits the album up into essentially 4 parts. And the second one, and what I noticed is with each different soundscape track, the dialogue gets much more distorted as it goes by, almost like it's getting worse and harder to hear the transmission. And this one, I've gotten my notes here. This is the kind of Mr. Speak and Spell part, where for any of those that are familiar with that grew up in the 90s, it's very much more digitized with the transmission, and it's going to further get that way with the other tracks alone. This obviously leads into a track we already discussed a little bit. The first single released for the album, which is One Day Closer to the End of the World. That big pick scrape leads right into that just kind of semi hook, semi mosh part, semi like meathead part. It's got great vocals kicking in over that part. Travis does some really cool vocal placement on this album. I am not the biggest fan of vocals when they sing over the guitar part almost note for note. Iron Man is a big representation of that. I'm not the hugest fan of that, but he does it in a way that makes sense. He's not singing the exact key note, like he's not singing the actual note that the guitar is playing, but he's doing it over the guitar parts with the same rhythmic pacing of it. One set of lyrics that sticks out in this part is there's a line talking about being death obsessed, and it kicks in over and over. We go straight from that big, heavy, like kind of palm muted, like heavy meathead riff into this like post metal, like blackened melody, which is the whole portion of the song. More great vocal lines. One day closer to the final tragedy. It's a track you get lost in. It does this great thing where like they can't possibly continue this intensity with this type of melody going over it, and it's repeated. It's repeated. It's traditional song structure. It's stuff that people recognize and can listen to and actually latch onto. And that they wouldn't be able to create a track like this without having gone through Monolith, without having gone through Anthropocene. You are now playing, I've said this in other episodes, they're playing to the back of the crowd. They're playing to every single person in that crowd. They're playing to like the arena crowd that they should be playing to. They're basically pacing their songs in a manner that like an Iron Maiden would, where they're like, all right, is the guy with the beer at the back of the crowd that just walked in, that is not going to have a front row, that doesn't know that we have these huge, massive, like, concept records about war and all of this, is he going to be able to get into that track? The guy that just spent his 40 quid to come into the show and like do this, is he going to be able to do that and also hear the fucking Trooper? This is that type of shit. But this just happens to be extreme metal.
Yeah.
So
right.
there's that much more to it. I mean, the whole vocal line, the whole chorus sounds like post metal. It sounds like blackened post metal to me. I was so happy to see the band go down this route with that. I was like, oh God, it takes all of those like Neurosis and those California influences to this, the industrial influences. It's not too overbearing with the industrial side of things. I mean, God, I'm fumbling over my words here because the track is just that good. One thing I want to stick out is we've talked about how influential Dave McGraw has been to this band since he joined it. And in my notes, I just have Dale play the shit out of those drums because like the dude is the pitch hitter.
Yeah.
Like Josh is such a good player when it comes to guitar work, but like McGraw is just like nailing it. The dude's feet are machines. I'm talking like Gene Hoglan or Raymond Herrera from Fear Factory on like Demanufacture. Like the dude's feet are machines.
He's cooking like the entire time. I mean, really, you kind of have those foundational members at this point where, you know, I mean, Dave came in as a younger man and
Yep.
really just kind of took hold. And, you know, what's so cool about their dynamic at all is that, you know, there wasn't any sort of, there was never going to be a thing where it's like, well, you know,
I'm just laying back.
I'm not Don Dokken. Like you have capability to write on these songs, or I don't even know if that makes sense, but you know, it wasn't ever, it wasn't ever like a thing where like, I'm the songwriter, you can't be that. And so I think everybody that has joined this band at one point or another has always been kind of welcome to not only showcase their skills as a player, but really just kind of add something unique, songwriting. They have the capability to really do what they were, you know, meant to why they were hired to be playing in Cattle Decapitation. And Dave McGraw really shines all over this record. He's cooking. Like, you know, just listen, like you said, his feet, the way he is able to blast through this whole thing. I mean, when we saw him live, could never understand. Like, I mean, obviously this guy, you know, has lived his entire life probably playing drums through most of it. And, but how you could sustain playing the way he does for so long every night. It's impressive.
Everybody that's in this band currently definitely plays for the song in mind. Sometimes on the past records, it definitely did feel like maybe everybody wanted to play for a certain part that they had in the album. And that bred really great results, right? But it definitely seems like with the trajectory of Death Atlas and Terrasite, you've got people playing for the song, which is ultimately what you want to do, which is ultimately when the song's good and everything lines up, dude, I mean, you can't beat that. And you want to talk about a hell of a song. It's the second single, Bring Back the Plague.
Yes.
Probably one of the most memorable melodies on the whole album.
Yep.
This is also a video that was filmed and made during the time of quarantine. So the video is literally all of them in their own homes, like doing God knows what. I think Travis is in like pajama bottoms.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is obviously written before the pandemic kickstarted, but to kind of not necessarily capitalize off of it, but it is kind of, you know, the big elephant in the room. Like, wow, you guys wrote a song called Bring Back the Plague, and then it quite literally happened. And so maybe to just kind of do something, you're trapped inside. Yeah, literally Travis is in his pajama bottoms. I think he's got his dog next to him and he's like, you know, blowing in his nose. I want to say the Ollie is like, you know, in a mask in his own home playing on, you know, in the bass and stuff like that. And then they kind of splice it up with, you know, actual footage from people going ape shit crazy in supermarkets, punching each other in the shops over toilet paper. Yeah, it's, you know,
there was a great merch drop when this song debuted as a single, and I kick myself for not buying it. It was a mask, but it was a butthole.
Oh, there, yeah.
It was a butthole, and I mean, I don't think the band will ever redo that, just because that was a period of time that I think all of us really want to forget. But you know, all things aside, video was fun, but the song is fucking great. I mean, it starts with blasting, like it's like fucking Euroblast. Someone's gonna butcher me on that one. But they're like, the guitars and bass are playing the melody already, which again is songwriting 101. You sample it. That way when the melody comes in, it's already in your brain to go like, oh, there's just lyrics over it now. The first riff is just a fucking cool riff. And then it just leads into this blackened like chord progression with these nasty, snarly vocals, which is like a pre-chorus. And then like singing over the main riff again, like this shit is wild.
Gang, 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 gang. Ah, amazing.
And then there's this great mosh riff that just reaches for the fucking meathead crowd. Like it's all there. I mean, the chorus is huge. It's open. It's just da 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 da. And there's a little bass lick in there too that kind of locks in with the drums. And it's again, I mentioned this before, a hummable vocal melody, a line that is just an earworm.
Oh yeah, you'll never forget it.
It's stuck in your head. You could literally put this on like a metal comp. Like when Headbangers Ball first came back in the early 2000s, they were releasing these compilations. I think they did 3 of them. It wouldn't shock me if Headbangers Ball was still around in that form. This wouldn't have been on one of those as one of those comp tracks, because it would have had so much fucking playtime to it.
You know, and obviously I think maybe perhaps you wouldn't want, I don't know what the feelings of the band are on this particular song. Maybe you kind of, I'm sure they didn't intend for it to be literally like taken. I mean, it's very unfortunate what happened. A lot of things that came after this album are very unfortunate. And I think, you know, the last thing you want to do is be remembered for like, well, now this is all this song is going to be remembered for. And maybe it loses some of the impact that you were trying to make when you first initially constructed it and wrote the lyrics for it. And, you know, it's just one of those things. And I don't know. I mean, I listened to it. It is really just so catchy. It's such a memorable song on the album. So yeah, unfortunately, it has that stipulation with it. It's going to be remembered for that. But it really kind of makes the album, for me in particular, too.
I mean, it's you could play this track to anybody that's not into extreme music, and they're going to go, wow, that's like all the other stuff I've ever listened to sounds like noise, but that's fucking something. I mean, we talk about like the melody on this track, but as the song ends, it descends with this big vocal pitch straight into like this chaotic black metal part. And it just ends with this great drum setup into this mosh riff with these great layered low vocals again. Like it just keeps going and going and going. What a fucking track. And it's like basically on the back half of the album. Like it's the ending of the first half of the record. It is the ending of the first half of the record because there's 14 tracks on this album. And then we get into Absolute Destitute, which might be one of my favorite tracks on the record.
I think this was definitely a highlight, even with some of the reception that this album got. I think this was like a song that definitely like resonated with people, resonated with me. It's certainly one of the better songs on the album, which is kind of a weird thing to say in itself. Like, I think this album really should be listened to as like one piece, but as a song in itself, I think this is definitely one of the best.
The opening motif of this song with the like second wave black metal arpeggiated chords, I just saw Mayhem. It made me immediately think of them when I saw it. Satyricon, Emperor, you name it. I mean, that's what's great is that's the chorus part, slightly adjusted for the choruses. Like it's in there, those great arpeggiated like notes. There's a chord progression there after the intro with what sounds like a swirling effect behind it, which again could be a keyboard or an ebow. Really, really kind of similar tones there. Those picked chords that just kind of like give you this feeling of enveloping darkness, like all throughout this track. It's a driving track. It doesn't let up. It just keeps pushing forward. The whole black metal side of this is just really, really, really cool. Anthropocene was full of these blackened elements, but this album almost takes it and goes, hey, let's write a black metal track.
Yeah.
This would be like, man, this would hold up with any like kind of the early or maybe the second wave Norwegian stuff. Definitely holds up with some of the more modern black metal in that vein. There's even a point where that motif comes back with the arpeggiated chords. It has like a slight phase to it that you hear it. Again, this song also has another great vocal line to it. We're flying too close to the flame. We play with fire, tempt our fate. That's almost Buddhist, almost Hindu esque kind of notation there. It's a black metal track. Again, like you said, the fire motif is there. What a great track. As you said, this album should definitely be listened to as one piece, but you could take this track and just go, hey, there's a rad fucking track from this album that could be on a playlist or anything like that.
Yeah. And kind of tying it into that idea of like one piece of art. Obviously, there's transitional songs. You have The Great Dying 2 to kind of move us into another part of the record with maybe the album's fourth single, I believe, Finish Them. What are your thoughts on this song in particular?
I fucking love this song. It just starts out, I believe it opens up with fire.
Yeah.
Like just starts out heavy as hell track, probably the most straightforward track on the whole record. Definitely more in the vein of old school death metal. I love this track. Meaty fucking riffs. Drum fills as a transition in this song. There's great slow mosh parts in this song. Again, this song plays to the back of the crowd. This plays to a vast majority of the crowd. It's got those great low vocals that make the rooms rattle to it. This is just a great straightforward track.
Yeah.
I don't see anything negative about this track. I'm assuming you asked me that because I'm sure there's some negativity about this track. I don't see how.
No, not at all. Really, I think
this is a live track.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely like, you got to put this in your set. No question about it. I'm sure if you were to see them now, obviously they got a tour coming as well that I definitely want to touch on later. But if they didn't play this, I'd be very shocked.
Yeah.
This next song has a title which makes me think like it's like a thing Swindle would say before he gets into making a point. With all disrespect, like,
it makes me think of the shit that you've heard me say my entire life. The entire time you've known me, our old man life. He's not here to defend himself. It's okay. Yeah. Let's continue to like talk shit.
Yeah.
That it just makes me think of that.
You wrote like a whole dissertation that I was not as prepared for. So I'm very curious to hear, how this kind of translates into, as a reactionary kind of description. You mentioned how you would kind of jotted down some of these notes.
So the opening of this track is like a very Dimmu Borgir-esque drum fill to me. Kicks in like more of that nausea-inducing kind of guitar harmony that's there, where it's not disharmonic. It's just very melodic in a sense that it just breeds this kind of nausea in your mind when you hear it. I definitely hear some more ebow kind of layered in there. There's a very thrash-esque part with these blackened chord undertones to it. Again, man, you can't listen to this record and not hear these vocal hooks all over this thing. Can you hear the end coming? Again, we're getting to the end of the record too, which is great. It's almost setting us up for what's going to be like this big crescendo at the end of the record, which this band is known for. Big, long melodic chorus part. And then it just goes back to that really fast thrash part.
there's a lot of like I think with some of the later records, you kind of mentioned this in the previous episode too, where there is like a traditional sensibility to some stuff. I mean, some of the guitar harmonies, even alone, there are definitely some parts on this, even on the next record, where I'm like, oh man, these guys just love like traditional sort of almost like new wave British heavy metal type of like guitar arrangements. We have this next song on the album that I feel like is a favorite of a lot of the band members, a lot of the interviews that I saw. It, you know, obviously if you are familiar with writing music, or maybe you're just a fan of being creative at all, especially in a collaborative setting, you know, sometimes it's everybody in the room can just feel when a song works. And so a lot of the story, a lot of the lore behind this record, it kind of points to Time Scroll Curtain, where they just kind of knew like, oh, okay, this is the song. And I mean, from the new members to the kind of the older gentlemen in the group that have been doing it a long time, I think this was certainly a favorite moment on the record for a lot of them.
This is a hell of a track. I got mental images of like descending down into the depths of what was left. There is a just definite like pit of despair on this track for sure. I mean, there is what I would consider like a tech riff that happens in the middle of this song that the whole band is just playing in unison. Again, more of those harmonies I mentioned before. This wall of like blackened guitars. Like, this would be a great record to listen to while playing, like, you know, I'm not the biggest video game guy, but like games that I'm familiar with are like the Castlevania series.
Sure.
You know, some of maybe the darker Legend of Zelda games that are out there. Like, this would be something to put on in the background, as I would think is a great soundtrack to that. There's some great like horror documentaries or even historical documentaries that would be great with this. You know, there is a great melody line with this vocal choir behind it almost. I mean, that's essentially what it is. It's just those vocals of his. And then you get that fucking great bass break that you get to hear that gnarly, distorted, crisp bass tone in. Spectre basses, Dark Glass products, which are just a great modern preamp pedal, which has kind of become the industry standard. There are some great videos about the recording of this album with Dave Attero, where he literally goes through all of the gear, all of the processing, everything he did to give people kind of an example of what went into this record. Check those out. If you're into that end of like music, if you're into the recording side, great knowledge there. Definitely gave me some insight of like what you could do with gain staging for a bass guitar. I mean, it's just a great fucking track, man. No wonder it's a favorite. Everything in that song sticks out to what I'm sure all the guys in that band wanted to hear from it. Obviously, what we get next is the last intermission, and it's definitely the most bleak one, and it has the weirdest cameo I would have ever thought in any sort of like death metal track.
Who doesn't love a Fish cameo on the Cattle Decapitation record? John Fishman, the drummer of Fish, does some of the narration on this track. I guess from what I read, John was just a very big fan of the band. And I mean, they always have like pretty eclectic taste, eclectic guests featured on their albums. And this is certainly one of them.
It's got that great piano line in it. You hear it. It's very sparse. It's very slow.
Patter does the some of the keyboards and the drumming on some of the tracks. He's in a kind of I don't know how you would describe it, but Midnight Odyssey is the kind of project that he works on as well, I think. But yeah, a good last transitional piece for the record.
It's very much vocally very much like a Nick Cave, like Vil Vallo from Him could do something like this. I hate the man so much. I hate his music, but like, you know, if Morrissey wasn't such a vapid turd, I'm sure like this would be a good line for him. But what we get which with the last, 3 Cattle records that have came out prior to this one, you get this great setup for what's to come with the crescendo track. And boy, do you get one. The title track, Death Atlas, Death at Last.
Third single for the record. The kind of culmination, the piece, the final statement. And what a statement it is, man. Really, you also get some guest vocals as well on this track, or additional vocals. This is, I want to say, a vocalist for Ryson and an ex-member of Igor.
That's right. Yes. Man, what a wild fucking band that is. Their most 2 recent records were put out by Metal Blade, and I hope they still get them. George Fisher was on the most recent one, and I think Travis was on the record prior.
Yeah.
I heard the first Metal Blade release by that band at a wedding I went to in 2018. Yeah, we were getting ready to actually like go in and process, and all like the groomsmen were in a room, and someone put this shit on.
That's awesome.
And like we were a little tanked. It's like, all right, I'm fine with whatever you nerds want to do now. What a fucking track.
I love the he does that like with the tom. It's like almost like he's dancing across some of the drum fills that he's doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's so wonderful. Dave's playing on this, and then I don't want to skip over too much because I know you'll have some things to add, but the kind of like some of the final vocal lines as well, because of everything that's happened.
we're gonna get to that.
Yeah.
Obviously, the whole song starts out with the full band pushing forward, like it's like a steamroller, just keeps pushing. The whole album's like that. These blackened melodies kicking right in, with these great pummeling blast beats. The vocals follow the guitar over this great thrash part, this just great thrash influence part. Sustained chords for the vocals to poke out. Basically, the band is playing these chords that are huge and kind of have these open spots, and for the vocals to stick out.
Yeah.
There's a great repeated mantra around halfway through the song. We deserve everything that's coming. We deserve everything that's coming, to a point that he does it so much that the vocals just get so unintelligible that it's like, it's just him spitting. It's just a mouthful of phlegm. It's one of the coolest things. Like this album, when I heard it, I was in love with the band before, but when I heard this album, I went, this band's untouchable. Like this was like, hearing this record was like hearing Crack the Sky all over again, which was 10 years prior to this. And then we get into that, we deserve everything that's coming. We take this world to our grave. That's the nasty line. And then we get to the great melody with There's No Fear for Tomorrow.
Yes.
When there's no, there's no trust for today?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. It's one of the most powerful songs. It's emotional. It's impactful. I keep saying those words, but it is exactly what I mean. And you are correct in saying that, I think in this late in the game, as far as, if you listen to a lot of music, there aren't too many records that maybe when you're younger, you remember some records that truly blew you away, that shaped who you were as a person and your musical journey. And so it's not to say that those don't happen, but you hear a lot all the time. And sometimes it's, maybe, you just experience it differently now. With this record, this was another record that was just like, wow, maybe it just hit you at the right time. It hit you at like the right moment when you listen to it all the way through. And I really feel like once you started with, that first intro track to the title track, you have really had such a wonderful musical, cinematic, extreme, abrasive experience listening to, perhaps one of the best records in this band's catalog, if not their best.
This was my favorite album of 2019, and it very much probably was the last record of that decade to really like hit that kind of crescendo, right?
No question.
A Cannibal hadn't put out a record since 2017, and then in 2019, like no one knew what was coming, no one had any idea, and then you hear this record, and in hindsight, you get the March of 2020, and you go, "Fuck, what did they know? They didn't know anything. They just knew that like we've treated this planet like shit. And getting back to this track, talking about treating the world like shit, the video for this thing is second to none. Yeah, I described it as Pompeii earlier, but in the center of this track, there's this quiet transition into this mosh riff that just starts and these low vocals over it. And that's when We Deserve Everything That's Coming kicks in and just gets like further and further venomous down into it. I mean, sustained chords kick in for that final chorus. There's no trust for today. The huge doomy outro of this.
The video is kind of like, I mean, they've been known, especially with the Monolith and stuff. They did like some more maybe like short film type things. This is the first time you have, I mean, Wes Benscotter obviously did the artwork, but he directed, I believe, that short film, like kind of long form video for this song. And man, it is wonderful, wonderful video.
It adds to the vibe of the record. Everything around this record, aside from the Bring Back the Plague video, everything around this record was catered to the overall concept of the record. The Bring Back the Plague video was a product of the times. Let's just face for what it is. There is definitely a feeling of just nothing left, loss, and just there's death anxiety at the end of this record of, you know, you hear it and you go, wow, what did I just listen to? It's like watching a really fucked up movie for the first time. It's like watching, you know, something like Hereditary, where you don't feel good at the end of the movie. You know, it's one of those, but I love albums like that. I like music like that. I don't have to feel good at the end of everything. You know, I can't remember who this quote is from, but you're probably not the happiest person in the world if you're a big fan of black metal. You're not going to have all these like great, you know, blissful days. You're going to have a lot of them. Don't get me wrong, but you're going to have those days that are bummers. And I'm glad to know we've got a band that writes music in that vein for stuff like that. And this album is, again, we've said this a couple times, if the band's career would have ended after this album, they would have done far more than any other band ever thought they could.
You know, obviously with, you know, you release a record like this, I always wonder what the reception of others, you know, what are other people, did they get the same experience that I got? Did they pick up on the same things? Did they interpret it the same way? You know, I think there were some mixed reviews for this record for sure, that we kind of mentioned. I mean, this ended up on a lot of, you know, top albums of the decade. I'm sorry, not this ended up on a lot of top albums of 2019. You know, people also lauded this as being one of the best of the band's career, but then there was a lot of mixed reviews. You know, maybe people felt like there was some, I'm not going to name the exact publications, where I was reading through some of these reviews and I'm like, did we listen to the same record? You know, the vocals being too much, you know, the riffs were stale. There had like boring black metal passages. At one point, somebody had said that the sound passages were useless. Yeah, there was someone who said that the runtime was bloated, being 55 minutes. It's really quite jarring, some of the reviews. And so, you know, obviously as a music fan, you're going to have different interpretations. You're going to have different feelings than other people. But to say, you know, I don't know, to say it was useless or bloated, I felt like that's kind of where I was like, I differed on the opinions of some of these publications, where I'm like, man, everything felt so like it needed to be there. Everything felt like it, there had a beginning, middle, and end. Sense. Yeah.
And after 4 years of not having a record, seeing something as being 55 minutes isn't really going to put me off. It would be different if this band, or any band for that matter, was releasing like 55-minute records every, you know, year or 2 years. Like that's, you know, I get that concept of like maybe edit a little bit. I mean, how many King Gizzard Wizard records have there been in the last 3 years? They just announced
another one.
642, and none of them are worth listening to.
I like the band. I think they got some stuff. I'm not like I feel like they're kind of like the Grateful Dead now, where they have like that sort of following where people are like, I got to see all of their shows. But I think there is an argument to be made that maybe if you release a ton of music like that, I feel like some of it definitely gets buried.
Absolutely.
I think they're very talented. I mean, they've just released like a metal record, and now I think they're going to follow it up with like it almost seems like maybe it'll be like a new wave record based on the pictures I've seen. It's very almost electronic based, but that's a whole nother can of worms.
When I hear bloated, like I get it, our attention spans have changed with the impact of a lot of different things. How we kind of digest media, how we digest entertainment has changed, but it's remarkable to say this is bloated because if you look at media too, like movies are getting longer. TV shows, which aren't even really a thing anymore, they're series. Those episodes get longer, but a death metal record, especially this kind of bleak and this intense and just even abstract in a lot of ways, being at 55 minutes does not seem vastly wild to me. Master of Puppets, I believe, is 54 minutes.
Perfect.
And that's a big overblown record too. Like that's a great record. It's a classic record. But I also think too, when you get a record like this, you have to digest it for a little while. You know, there are going to be some people that love it immediately, but you have to digest it a little while. And with each Cattle record that comes out, I know I'm going to have to digest it for a little while.
Yeah.
That's why I love it. That's why I love this band. I may not get everything immediately, but when I do, it's usually about 2 or 3 listens in.
Yeah.
When I do, it's perfect. It's not like, there are certain bands I can listen to and I get it first listen. And those are great. I love those too. But I really like being challenged. And this was a challenging listen. And it just made up in dividends.
Yeah.
At this point.
Before I kind of wrap it up on this particular record, I think there is a lot of truth in perhaps maybe over time, this album will be looked back on as a classic if it hasn't already been, cemented in that light. I think there were a lot of things obviously that happened that, kept the record from being promoted to the fullest extent. There were obviously some elements of the record that were polarizing for a lot of fans, but I think once maybe the kind of dust settles, and I think we're kind of getting to that point now, you look back on a record like that and it's really just kind of a classic of their discography.
I did want to touch kind of on the touring cycle for Death Atlas. Obviously it was halted very much so for a lot of reasons, and it took a lot of bands got really, really burned hard with the pandemic, and we're still feeling that 3 years later, almost 4 years later. This band really didn't finish up the touring cycle of this album until earlier 2023 with a big arena series with Amon Amarth, Carcass, Obituary.
Which is even harder in itself too, because like they even mentioned, obviously with a longer record, a lot of, you're not co-headlining a tour, you're not headlining a tour, you're kind of supporting these other pretty classic bands.
These legacy
bands. It's hard to really get this record across in a live setting.
Yeah.
Not to say that Cattle Decapitation can't throw down in, like a 30-minute set, but you're kind of having to scale back what could be done, what could have been done had, we not, been coughing all over each other and, sent behind closed doors for a while. But the end of the world happens and the dust settles. What would you like to come back as, Dylan?
As my friend Bart Simpson once said, I would come back as a butterfly because no one expects the butterfly.
And no one expects the Terrasite. This is an album that was released back in May, and a very anticipated record. We essentially have a 4-year gap in the Cattle discography, essentially from Death Atlas. I think there was a lot of anticipation for this record. I think, or at least for me as a fan, because we were big fans about, everything that went into the construction and the arrangements and just really the songwriting elements on Death Atlas, you think, okay, well, now the band has clearly found another groove in itself on Death Atlas. What could possibly happen? How could you even outdo yourself on the next record? I mean, thematically, I mean, really even as well, like, you've quite literally destroyed the world. You wiped out everyone. Where do you go from here? And so, what I love about it is now you really have like almost like this fantastical kind of element. Now you're building off of your storyline in such a wild way. Yep. I mean, even with the artwork itself, I mean, another Wes Benskotter classic here with you kind of where you had like the painting, which fits so well for the previous record. Now you kind of are returned to form with this like hyper realistic, very strange. I mean, it crosses over several mediums where you have like almost sculpture, there's photography, there's painting. I guess let's get into Terrasite, the record from this year.
Let's start with the artwork,
yes,
which we touched on a little bit. So I believe that the artwork leaked.
Yes.
Before the album was actually announced, and the band, in retaliation to that, said some asshole leaked our artwork. All right, here's the artwork. Here's the album. We'll have an announcement in the coming week. That sort of thing. I was awaiting this record like the second fucking coming, based off my just excitement for Death Atlas. But the artwork on this is great. When I first saw it, it made me think of a Cannibal Corpse album called Bloodthirst. They did an edited cover of the Bloodthirst album that had this very like kind of Japanese style monster on it done by the great Vince Locke. And it's very reminiscent of that. But when I saw it, I immediately went, oh yeah, the world ended with Death Atlas. This is just what's bred from, this is what's coming from the ash.
This mindless, violent creature. I mean, just kind of doing some of the research and what, they listed for the kind of the title and the artwork itself, the character, Terra, Latin for earth, Sitos, Greek for food. And so you kind of have maybe two definitions of what this could possibly mean, what this character, the Terrasite, what it does, why it exists. A devourer or destroyer of land and earth, post-Anthropocene humanity, basically a post-apocalypse featuring humanity as a de-evolved life form known as the Terrasite, with really little reason to exist.
There's obviously a light concept to it as well. With I think any record this band does moving forward is probably going to have a bit of that. That's why the albums take so long in between. They put a lot of work into writing these records, and I'm just going to say it right out the gate. I love this record.
Yes.
I have not a negative thing to say about this record. I think there are chances that this band took on this record that if they continue moving forward in that direction, you're going to see something wild from this band on the next record. I do still stick with Death Atlas didn't get the amount of gestation that I think it deserved before they moved on to the next record, because you had the pandemic and all the stuff that went on. You had essentially 2 years where nobody was doing anything. So what else did they do? They wrote. They continued writing the next record, which became Terrasite. So that's where you get a lot of the similarities from the record prior, in which I think this one is far more straightforward sounding than Death Atlas. Death Atlas had this this, not to say this album doesn't have layers to it, but Death Atlas had such a massive concept tied in with every single facet of the record that this one is far more straightforward in representation. The lineup is unchanged.
Yep.
You've still got the same group of guys. This album maybe even bleaker than the last record, because you had two major deaths that happened in between that. We lost Trevor Strnad from the Black Dahlia murder, and you lost Gabe Serbian.
Yeah. I mean, essentially a former, a founding member of this band, which we touched on in the very first episode. But yeah, a founding member of the band, a former member of the Locust as well. Obviously a very huge integral part, and I'm sure a very very good friend to a lot of the big people that were in this band for so long. And I want to say this all happened prior to the band entering the studio. I think the band was supposed to enter the studio the week that Gabe had actually passed on.
So if I remember right, man, because I watched an interview with Travis and he was talking about this. I believe they entered the studio the day he died. He walked out of the funeral for Gabe and found out Trevor passed away.
Wow.
So it was just like, boom. Bands they had toured with, bands that they have a lot of connection with, that sort of thing. So that already adds this air of just weight to this record. On top of like, this is the first record since bands are touring again. We just came off a pretty successful run of dates with these legacy acts, crowds we've never played to before. I mean, my best friend from high school went and saw this tour just to see Cattle and Carcass, and he's like, I'm going home. He's like, I'm going home. He's like,
I get it.
He's like, Obituary's boring. I'm going home.
I love. We've seen Obituary a little bit.
I've seen them twice now.
Yeah. Classic band. It's a different world, and it's pretty cool that a tour like that could exist. But I understand that
and played arenas.
I think they talked about like playing like the LA Forum. That's
it.
Crazy that this style of music.
That's where Slayer played their last show of their career at.
Absolutely.
But there's already a weight to this album. Massive weight of there's despair of losing two really close, seemingly beneficial members of kind of the extended death metal underground music family. With this, I mean, this album's something though. You've got these 3 tracks with these music videos. I mean, we've got the first single, which is "We Eat Our Young."
I want to touch on that because this is very prevalent in my history of being a metal fan. Ever since I was young, I never had challenges. I never had any problems listening to this form of music a lot of the time. But I get it. It's not for everyone, and you're gonna catch some flack from time to time, especially maybe from some parents that they're supportive, but they don't maybe exactly understand what it is you like about this music.
Yeah.
And I can remember being in my room listening to maybe like Testament, or maybe I was listening to Morbid Angel or something like that.
Yeah.
And my dad's like walking by my room and he kind of like backtracks. He's like, do you listen to this just to get attention? And I'm like, hey, all right. I'm here just minding my own business. And so then he starts trying to replicate the vocals. And this happened through many years where he's trying to like do his version of the death metal vocals. And the line that he always had was, "We eat our children." And now he's right. A band basically wrote a song like that. And
they wrote it for him.
Yeah, I was like, all right, cool.
So kind of getting into that aspect, I never dealt with that portion of it. My dad always called it "fuck your mama, fuck your daddy" music, because you might as well fuck your mom and your dad if you're going to listen to that shit.
What's the score of the Jets game last night? You're mad at him, not me.
Yeah. Your dad can't hurt you anymore. I hate my dad. But when I saw the title, I didn't even think twice. I was like, I've been listening to fucking death metal for almost 20 years. Like, nothing shocks me anymore. But then you have Scourge of the Offspring right after that, which is, when I heard that track, it kicks off like it does. My girlfriend is a massive fan of The Office. I've officially have watched that series twice through at this point, but there's a point where like Dwight has to get pumped up to like go do a cell, and he's in the car, and he's got like, I think it's Kickstart My Heart blaring as loud as possible, and he starts air drumming. When I heard this song and I heard the intro and it kicked in with that kind of like bleh, I went, oh yeah, that's what Dwight's listening to when the drums kick in. I was like, oh, that's that. Like, that's immediately it. And then Aphotic Doom, which is a great video, very creepy video.
Wonderful.
All three of these songs were released prior to the album's release, which is kind of the process now. Bands will release anywhere from 3 to 6 singles before the album's out. That way you can help push the sales. A single now is vastly different to a single when Death Atlas was released.
Absolutely.
It just shows, I mean, it's completely different. But we might as well, we've already touching on some of the tracks here. We might as well just start digging in.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see, like, just to touch on it for a second, is the how the sequencing works as well. Because, with a band like this, it's, I don't know, an album gets released, and obviously leading up to it, you're going to have singles, maybe. Sometimes a band may not even release anything, depending on who they are. But, obviously you have 3 tracks leading up to the song, and just to see how they're kind of sequenced in the order, obviously the first 2 that we discuss are kind of front loaded. Whereas like Aphotic Doom is kind of pushed maybe on the back half of the record. But the opening is great. Obviously it kind of sounds like there is a creature kind of making its way to the surface for the first time before it just kind of unleashes again. And this band is so good at kind of setting the mood of the story.
They set the mood and they end the story really well. The albums are not open-ended. Like, you got a beginning, you got an end.
Yep.
And they're fucking great at it, and they've gotten better at it as the years go by. You and I were discussing off camera earlier today about how this band just gets better with every release they put out at whatever they're doing at the time. This is another one of those albums I did just like a deep listen to, and just immediately we were like discussing, what I was hearing and feeling on these listens. Of this one. I really want to say that this album, to me, sound-wise, just is weighty. Atero's mixes and his recording just gets better with each album he does for this band. And I think he's going to be known for, obviously, a lot of recordings he's done, but he's going to be most known for these albums he's done for this band. But everything on this album just feels heavy. Like the weight of the mix, the bass guitar is just, it's there. I mean, it's even more distorted than the last record, but you can still hear every note articulation in it. The vocals on this album are maybe some of the driest, like, vocal production ones I've heard in a while. He is getting better at enunciating too. Like, you can hear almost every word on here.
I know we've touched on the first few tracks. When I think this is entirely prevalent on the Insignificance. That I for sure was like, when I heard that track in particular, I was like, it is very clear. Like, one, who he's talking about, obviously, like the creature that is replicated on the cover. But yes, when I heard the song, first and foremost, I was like, because I know myself. And if I tried to do it, I'm like, if anyone's listening to this podcast, thank God for editing. But there's definitely some times where, like, I do not pronounce words right. I could not do what he is doing and pronunciate these words with like the weight and like the skill that he is bringing to each syllable.
The levity. So let's just start from track 1, man. We've touched on it a little bit. Terrasitic Adaptation. Quietly kind of kicks in. You can hear the creature crawling from the primordial ooze, the cesspool of life. And from that vibe, just from knowing this band, it's going to be an intense fucking listen.
Yep.
This whole album is intense. That's the word, intense. Maybe it's not as abrasive as some of that earlier output from the band, but it is intense. It just kicks in hard. You've got a harmony riff on this track that starts out at like 2 minutes, 14 seconds, 2 minutes, 15 seconds. And then it's just back into blasting. The vocal placement and the hooks on this track are second to fucking none. I mean, I mentioned it on the Death Atlas portion, but they're playing to the arena crowd. They're playing to the back of the crowd. They're playing to the everyman on this stuff. The mosh riff that it kicks in at the 3-minute mark. I mean, it just sets the whole album off right. It cues to this great melodic vocal by Travis. that just, again, throwback to the Death Atlas cycle. You've got more of it. You know, it's just a blackened, melodic, blistering, like speedy and doomy song. There's definitely aspects on this album where I think I've seen some reviews on this record, and a lot of people thought it was like a rehashing, and it's not. You got to listen to it, and you got to really listen to it. Don't put it on with just like shit going on in front of you. Like, listen to it, and you can hear the nuances and the differences between this and Death Atlas. Yes, I would say the progression is a little bit slimmer because it's still in the same world as Death Atlas. But what an opening fucking track. The band never misses with those opening tracks. They definitely go back to all those old classic records where there's just a great opening track. Then we kick into the baby eating song.
Yeah.
We kick into We Eat Our Young. First track released for the album cycle. It is modern cattle at their best. This is a great gateway track for new fans too, I believe. This is one of those tracks you could be like, hey, you're going to like this. If you liked Amon Amarth's new record, or if you liked the newest Carcass release, or if you like the newest Cannibal release, whatever, you can hand them this and go like, you're probably going to like this. This band is far more in vein, I think, with classic death metal than the death metal crowd truly wants to give credit for. It's just more hooks. There's a great riff that starts out at 1 minute and 42 seconds in this track. The bass cuts through hard on this song.
Yeah, Ollie's like really throwing it down on this entire record. He's a good player, really, really good player. Travis, we can talk about how his vocals sound. We can talk about the techniques he uses, blah, 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 blah. I don't think he gets enough credit for his placement. He definitely has good placement ideas of where the vocals should go and how they fit in the song. And this is a really good representation of it. And then you get that nice quiet guitar break, and then it's back into it again. Yeah, no, this was obviously we have a live show that airs every Monday. And so this was like certainly a favorite of mine to play each week. Got me really, really excited for the record. Obviously the visual components of this song that we got before the record, but I mean, what an amazing third track. Some guest performances, I guess, as far as like Dispatter, who was on the previous record, providing some percussion and keyboard elements to this song. What are your thoughts on it? First listen, I mean, obviously you'd listened to this for a while, but kind of re-entering the album for this episode, what are your initial thoughts?
When I heard the track, I just listened to it and just took it in and really appreciated what the track was, which is just a great, straightforward death metal track. What I didn't realize was, until I watched an interview, was there's not a blast beat on this song at all. There's no blasting anything at all. And it's just like bonkers to think like, oh, they could do that. They don't have to have it in every track. And it just adds to it. I wanted to touch on some of the guest spots on this record. All of their albums are always kind of known to have guest roles. This has the least amount on any record. This is a very sparse record. And I think Travis handles a lot of keyboard parts on here. A lot of it, aside from a couple, I think there's 2 or 3 tracks with keyboard on it. The rest of it's like EBO.
Yeah.
The rest of it is just like guitar techniques. This track is absolutely great. There's a riff that starts at 1 minute. That's probably the most memorable riff on the track. The songwriting of this thing is wild. The pre-chorus / chorus makes me want to watch the world start again. It's the end of the first chorus, with the guitar back and forth, the dan, it just, I love that shit in a track. And then it all kicks in, and then there's this groovy and just huge sounds, on this track. And it's got that great vocal line that always sticks out to me is, what a wondrous life this would have been. And it's like, well, that's like Leave It to Beaver shit, man.
I love it.
There's not a soul that's listening to this that probably has any idea what Leave It to Beaver is, and nor should they. It was terrible. It just ends with this great mosh riff of a track. Like this is a repeated listen song. This is one of those tracks that could I don't think greatest hits compilations will probably ever exist for a lot of bands anymore. It's going to be playlist more so than anything. This would definitely be on a greatest hits comp.
Yeah,
I think.
no question.
So that leads us to the next track, which is track 4, which you've already touched on a little bit, which is the Insignificance. And my take on this track is pretty straightforward. It's an ass beater.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a hell of a track. Straightforward. There's some slam-esque shit on this track. It's got a big doomy sounding bridge to it. There's a great vocal line in this one as well. That's just, "We have always been the virus."
Yep.
And it's just
that enunciation, like all of his vocal delivery on this song in particular is wonderful. That was essentially my biggest takeaway from that track. Really kind of ushering through a little bit more. I mean, the Storm Upstairs, another kind of halfway mark here on the album.
Great title.
Yes.
By the way, very good title, very heady title. Definitely makes you think of, especially if you take it in contrast to the track before it, the Insignificance, going to, the Storm Upstairs definitely makes me think of a mind becoming conscious,
yes.
right? There's that point where we're all like 3 or 4 years old and we go like, why am I shitting in my Pampers? Like, what's going on? What the fuck? I have all these questions. I have all of these concerns. I don't know what to ask. And that's what I see it as. What was your take on this track?
That's wow. I don't that was such a good it made me shit in my Pampers. Genuinely. When I heard it. Oh God. I think it's a great that's a good midway kind of point for the record. Yep. Which again you kind of like mentioned earlier. I mean, it doesn't have a lot of guest spots on it. It is a longer album in some of the previous records we've discussed, but there's only 10 songs. There's no bonus tracks. I kind of failed to mention that on the previous record that it does have some bonus material on it, like a cover. But this record is pretty straightforward.
So it's straightforward. There's not a lot of frills to this record. It's 10 tracks. It's a little bit longer. However, a lot of that has to do with the final track.
Yes.
We'll get to that one. But some notes I had on the Storm Upstairs: heavy intro, really weighty sounding, gnarly gutturals coming in. Every track on this album feels like it was crafted for vocals.
Yes.
Every single track. There's a great bass break on this track, followed by these harmonized guitars. There's some layered guitars in here that are really haunting sounding. I would not be shocked if a couple of these guys definitely dug into some old Goblin kind of like soundtracks and stuff for sure.
I like that. Yeah.
With some of the vibes on this.
We're getting into the spoopy season here, and we got to definitely throw on that Suspiria soundtrack.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great soundtrack. Like the Hellraiser soundtrack is amazing. There's definitely some of that at play on this record for sure. There's a big gnarly chorus, and then it's a chromatic feel the whole way out. It's like, what a fantastic song and a very tightly written record.
The speaking of song titles, this next one is certainly one of my favorite. And the world will go on without you. Man, talking about bleak. Talking about a bleak track. Definitely one of my favorite moments on the record as far as songs go.
Prior to recording, obviously today we lost a very old member of Senate or Congress, and when I saw that, it just kind of struck me of like, life will go on without you. Like, you served for 90 years. Like, all right, you served your purpose. Like, go on, do your shit. I mean, this is probably the fastest track on the record.
Absolutely.
It's tight too. Like it's so fast that you have to be tight. Like there's no room for error on this at all. Dave really shows his shit on this track. McGraw is like really kicking in hard on this track. you start out with this like Blackened style verse. It just kicks right in. And then you've got these layered vocals and you end up with this double time guitar feel in it where they almost like they actually recorded it to the grid. However, they ended up boosting the tempo a little bit there on the grid to make it have more of a live feel to it. And it adds a little bit more character and depth to the song because it does feel like you're just in the room. There's no click track, just like the Harvest Floor felt.
Yes. And it's kind of cool to hear you kind of describe that, what you were feeling when you were listening to it. Cause like I noticed that as well, but now when you're like kind of describing like how you would maybe achieve something like that, it helps it kind of me figure it out in my head.
Those double time guitars, you've got the Into a Fast Slam, which is just bonkers. And then I've heard him use this description of his vocals, but I actually did this before I saw this interview. These are some older notes. The Gollum vocals on the bridge are the Gollum vocals on the bridge. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You end up with a great vocal. You get this great melody placement. More great vocal lines in this track, and then you got a mosh part that ended out. If this band has not proven that they have figured out how to structure a great death metal track, a la a Cannibal Corpse, a la a Suffocation, Exhumed, the whole nine, like they have figured out how to structure great tracks for impact. I mean, fuck, what a track. And then it leads into the final release, essentially the final release single of the album that is a gnarly, scary, like sounding track. The video is terrifying. Aphotic Doom, you know, it just a pummel of a track.
The band, I mean, really, that something must have happened within those like that 4 years of like,
oh, I'm sure,
you know, if you really only are sitting there, you don't have much time else other than to write. It sounds like they really kind of, and I don't know. I mean, I think we both kind of agreed maybe this was a band that doesn't necessarily write on tour. So if you're kind of maybe even some of those older releases too, where you really didn't have a lot of time to sit on a record. I mean, even Dave McGraw's like first record, I think, you know, he didn't maybe even, I don't know if it was that he didn't live in the area yet, or he was busy doing other things. He really couldn't even record with the band on this first record. And then over time, they've kind of worked out what works well for them as a unit, all the dynamics. They've clearly gotten it figured out with Dave Attero as their producer. I loved watching some of the behind the scenes footage for this as well, where, you know, again, it's just like they're in the war room, just kind of talking about what needs to happen before they go in and really kind of hash this stuff out.
Is this the album that's got the footage where Travis breaks the mic?
Oh, I think maybe. I mean, there's a couple of videos where he breaks a few things, where he like broke headphones and
that's what it was. It was the headphones.
Yeah, that might be on an older one, but I do remember there's like some drum parts where they're like talking about like the fast parts are too fast and the slow parts are too slow.
I think that's about Scourge of the Offspring.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's cool. I love seeing all that stuff. And, you know, Dave also has like you kind of mentioned before, where he almost has like a podcast or like a video series on his own YouTube page where you can kind of see like interviews with Travis after, and they really go deep on some of the inner workings.
That's Dave Attero we're talking about, not Dave McGraw.
Right, correct.
Dave Attero has, okay, because there's two Daves involved.
Yes,
with this
Dave
band
Attero, yes. Not to confuse the two, yes.
But Aphotic Doom, you know, keyboards on it. The band is firing on all cylinders. There's layers upon layers. Great song structure to this track. The video's gnarly. It's interesting yet familiar in scope. It's not something that is like out of left field and expecting you to like understand it. It's got a solid, really moody guitar solo in it. You know, melodic vocals at the end. The vocals like that are used sparingly throughout the track, but they're really impactful the way they're used. And then you get a great spoken word outro to it.
I like what you said with the moody. I feel like this band definitely mixes somber and melancholy with extreme music very, very well. Very, very well.
So the last 3 tracks on this album are probably some of the best on the album.
Yes.
In particular. This next one has the best title to me. My favorite track title, Dead End Residence.
Dead End Residence.
Thick black metal shit going on in here. A very post-apocalyptic feel to the album, which again ties into the concept of the record. This song sets up the last 2 tracks perfectly without using soundscapes. This album used songs in place of soundscapes almost for those last 2 tracks, to where the last few records have had more soundscape stuff to it. This is a straightforward record. This is a really straightforward record.
I don't even want to say like trim the fat necessarily, because I think a lot of that stuff works for what they were trying to attempt with previous records. But they really, like you said, no frills, nothing like super out of the ordinary. It is really just like song after song after song.
I mean, this track is another ass beater. I mean, it doesn't let up. It's got great riffs to it. There's a huge weight to this whole record, but there's certain tracks in particular that exude that. There's melody all over this one. It's got a gnarly bridge into a breakdown that is on here. That is something to just like,
yeah, this band always like, it's so funny when I think of this band initially, and it is like the speed that this band usually is like playing at, but then it's got the ooga, man. They got ooga, and they certainly got booga.
So anytime I hear this band, or like bands that know how to like, do the whole breakdown thing the right way, I get the image in my mind is John Candy when he figures out he has to eat the fat and the gristle, just like that. So, we touched on live shows that we had both went to at the beginning of this episode, and there is a Cannibal Corpse track called that's off the last album that's got this great slow down kind of breakdown in it. Inhumane Harvest is the track. And I grabbed our friend Matt Graham during the beginning of that, because there's a part where it's these 2 harmonies that set up, and I just shook him as violently as I could because I knew what was coming. This band knows how to do that too. This band has a great grasp on how to set those parts up.
The next song, you sent me a message the other day, and I guess you were probably re-listening to the album. You reached out to me and you were like, Solastalgia is probably the best cattle decapitation song ever written.
I agree.
Yes.
I stick with that. It's maybe not the heaviest track they've ever written. Maybe it's not the most technical. It's not the most melodic, but there's something about this track. There's a track on every album to me that sets up what could be coming next. If this band continues to go in the territory of this song, we're going to get some wild shit on the next record. This is probably my favorite track on the album. You could have ended with this track alone, and you could have honestly released Just Another Body as like a standalone single by itself. Okay. I truthfully think so. Not to say like Just Another Body being on here is a bad thing. It makes the album flow. It's a great track, but something about this song just did it, because the chorus, the traditional chorus, doesn't kick in till the tail end of the fucking song, and it kicks in a way that like there's the vocal dynamics on it. There's like they build to a vocal like peak in that song, crescendo.
Yes.
I mean, it kicks off with great layers and speed, like any cattle track. There's EBO that sounds like horns kicking in on it. There's the vocal line of what the fuck did we do? What the fuck did we think we could prove? It's got another rad bass break in it, like a lot of these last 2 albums have had. The vocal line I love that just gets nasty. Life is torture, just over and over and over again. And it's, I mean, you've watched Futurama, the frog thing they made that just kill me.
Oh,
no,
yeah,
that's The Simpsons. I'm sorry.
Oh,
kill
I almost
me.
thought I thought you were talking about Hypnotoad for a second, but I do recall the, absolutely.
kill me. But Life is Torture, just into another like mosh part. I mean, come on. Like, something obviously happened in between Death Atlas and this record to really cause some of the violent nature of the lyrics and the bleak, depressive nature of the lyrics. Then you get to the part. You get to this big open bridge that's building, and you can tell it's building from first listen. And like, it's very much like this hyper melodic thing. And then it builds up to the most melodic thing this band has ever done. And it's like, when I hear it, that plays into like, that is some like classic hard rock shit. That is some like almost alternative rock shit. And that it for whatever reason, it made me think of some like melodies from like Baroness's Blue album, from Crack the Sky, like the big layer. If this band travels down this territory to do something like this, who knows what this band could be? Who knows if they want to go in this territory? This may be an outlier. And if it is, it's going to go on as one of the weirdest and probably arguably the best things the band's ever done. It's a huge highlight from this band's career, which has a lot of highlights already. And I don't know what the lyrics are about, but there is a weight to them that makes you completely rethink maybe what the whole album is actually about.
Well, in this, like you mentioned, that on every record, really, it kind of builds into a statement. And to really round out that, 52-minute mark, you essentially have a 10+ minute ending song, a closer, just another body. Yeah, just another body. How do you feel like, I mean, obviously you have such a strong song in Solastalgia, but, with Just Another Body, again, a really fantastic title as far as songs go, as a closer, as a last statement for their 10th record.
Fuck, this was a hard one for me to listen to. We're all getting older, right? Yeah. We could be gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
We could draw a short straw and we could be gone tomorrow. We have family members that are getting older. We're seeing things that are changing. We're seeing people grow, things change, and we're starting to, the older we get, the more we realize like how much time we don't have. And you start to see the body kind of, maybe not respond the way it once did. And you start to see things change. You start to see kind of cognitive decline. And this album gives me death anxiety, or this song gives me death anxiety for a lot of things. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad track or I'll never listen to it. But there were a lot of emotions when I listened to this song. This is the epic on the album. I mean, I still truly believe this could feasibly have been a song by another band.
Yeah.
I stand by what I said about Solastalgia. That could have been the last track on the record. But this is almost like you've got the cake. It's all dressed up. It's nice. Here's the candle that's on fire with your birth year on it.
Yeah.
Like this is the treat on top of that, man. I know in an interview, Travis actually said that he got too personal with this song. I don't know what that means. He didn't divulge into that. Lyrics are left up for interpretation, which is great. I like bands like that. I like when music is that. I could definitely foresee this hitting close to home because it hit me close to home. It's massive sounding, massive proportions. It's got a catchiness and weight that reflects the album's kind of black/purple shades that come to mind when I think of it, like hues of blacks and purples. The layered vocal outro ends perfectly with the keyboards and synths that kind of fade out into it. It fades out. There's no like spoken word, anything. It is just a bleak, depressive post-black metal track by a band that is just really, sowing its oats in what they want to do. If these last two tracks on this album feed into what's to come, we better get prepared to be real sad.
I like being sad. But no, you're right. It's It's so surprising about this band, kind of just to close out the record, is that, 30 years later, really, you're kind of knocking at the door at this point.
Yeah.
They're still finding ways to surprise you. We've mentioned some songs throughout their discography where this could have been a different band. This album could have been written by a whole different group, where, it's kind of amazing to see this far in the game that you still have moments like that where you could, something excites you where it's like, wow, I really can't wait to hear what the next record's going to be if they include stuff like this. It's kind of unheard of, really, in a band that's career has lasted as long as it has. I mean, sometimes it's just safer to be consistent, and that's fine too. I mean, like, the Motorhead records are there, and I know exactly what I'm getting with a lot of those.
Sure.
And they're great. Love them. But there's also something to be said about a band that takes risks, and they like to include things that they're interested in over time. From what started out as like pretty much gore grind project, we got black metal, and we got like, I think I heard in an interview where Travis said, like, a lot of the stuff he listens to outside of playing shows, he doesn't really, maybe he doesn't listen to a lot of, heavy aggressive music on the car ride anymore. But if it is heavy, maybe it's some of the more atmospheric black metal type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They're big and then grandiose type music. So it's cool to see that kind of included in a song like this to finish out your album.
You could break this band's catalog into multiple tiers, and I think Travis did it pretty well in an Aggressive Tendencies interview, where you take Humanure, or you take To Serve Man through Karma Bloody Karma. That's an era. Then you go the Harvest Floor through, honestly, probably Anthropocene.
Mm-hmm.
But he even tied in maybe Death Atlas into that. I think you've got a new era of this band starting with this album. Almost seems like a fresh start, because anytime this band starts a new era, which is probably unintentional, the albums are a little bit more straightforward. To Serve Man, very straightforward. Monolith, very straightforward. This is a very straightforward album in comparison to Death Atlas. And if that's what we're seeing, man, I really hope we don't have to wait till 2027.
Yeah.
For the next record. Hopefully we get one, maybe 2 years down the line, maybe 3. I was completely, at first listen, I went like, oh, this is like Death Atlas Part 2. And then I listened for the 4th time and the 5th time and the 6th time and went, no, it's not. This is something entirely different. And this band, I hope this band is fucking proud of this record. They should be. It's a great, great album. And it is thus, traveled the band into the modern times of where they're at and what they are going to be. I think they deserve this, and Death Atlas are 2 albums I would love to see the band go, hey, we're going to play this album in whole.
Yeah.
We're going to do this album in whole. That way it's represented the best way possible. And they probably won't do that. That's kind of a played out thing now, but it would be great. I'd love to see that. I would pay to see that tour alone of like, hey, night 1 is this, night 2 is that. We've got a couple sets of classics as well. I would travel to see that. Chicago's just a quick 6-hour drive.
That's right.
I would make that shit happen in a heartbeat. This is I said you could hand the Harvest Floor and you could hand Death Atlas over to any new fan of the band or someone that wanted to get into it. I'd give them this one as well and go, hey, you know what? Listen to the Harvest Floor, take a break, then listen to both of these in succession, because you're going to get what the band was and what the band is now.
And I'm very much looking forward to, like you said, if there is a new era of this band, all the more reason to talk about them. I mean, their career quite literally speaks for itself, but I'm so glad that we've kind of taken this opportunity to really dive in deep and hit every era, really talk about it. And I hope that we get to do this more. I hope we get to talk about bands that really, really deserve a spotlight of 2 just idiots, really just who we just love this, and this was so fun to do. I really can't wait to see what's next for Cattle Decapitation. Obviously, you're going to look back at this discography and think, wow, this was something special. Lightning in the bottle type of career. From start to finish. A band that's really had a few different wins, and maybe we're seeing something new. Maybe we're seeing something kind of bubbling. I'm very much looking forward to the next thing that they're doing. And like you said, maybe I hope it doesn't take too long, but maybe another 4 years is what it takes to kind of make something truly special and unique.
So to kind of touch on what this band has done in its career, Terrasite ended up being their highest charting release they ever had, in which we've discussed in detail in prior episodes that the charts aren't really what they once were. But it's still a big deal for a death metal band to be charting that high. I believe they charted at 21 on Billboard for this thing, which is insanity to hear. They just got back from an Australian tour with Fallujah. They're getting ready to go on their first U.S. headlining tour since Death Atlas came out, I believe. Mm-hmm. It's going to be hitting major portions of the U.S., Eastern Canada. Looks like they're going to be taking the Mighty Immolation out with them. Which is another great death metal band that you'll probably hear us talking about. The ever fun Sang with Sugabog is like going on tour with them, and a band called Castrator that I'm not familiar with, but what a great name.
Yeah.
Just a great name.
I know they're coming through here. I'm really hoping to see it live. And I don't know if, again, I'm so sorry to throw you under the bus with some of that stuff. Are they coming through the area? You going through to Louisville or Nashville or anything?
Man, you know they're coming nowhere near here. I think they're playing Atlanta.
Yeah, all the more reason to come up here then.
What a great band. What a great catalog. I think when we initially started discussing this deep dive, even I was just like, should it be a Cannibal Corpse? Should it be a Deicide, a Sepultura, a Morbid Angel before we do this? And then I think we both unanimously just kind of said, Terrasite's coming out. Let's just do Cattle first. It'll be fun. And we've learned something from this deep dive too, of like, these are a lot of fun. It's fun to analyze a band's catalog like this. And as you said, hopefully we get to show a spotlight on a band's catalog in the future that deserves that attention. And hopefully you guys will stick around and listen to it. Listen to just two knuckleheads sitting here blabbing on about nerd shit for probably about 2 hours.
Yeah. Well, I, again, can't thank you enough for, listening to all these different parts. You'll definitely know when it might be a while because these do take, it takes a lot. But
yes, they do.
It is a lot of fun. And when we do it again, I have no doubt it's going to be just as interesting. We're going to learn a lot. And I can't wait for the next one. All right, we've reached that part of the episode where we like to talk about things we've been listening to as of late. I talked about it in the last episode as far as a few singles being released, but now it has finally arrived. Common Suffering, the newest record by Harm's Way, is out now on another Metal Blade Records band. This is near and dear to my heart, a Chicago hardcore band that has really pushed the boundaries of their sound, a band that has also really just gotten better over the course of their career, kind of starting out more in the vein of like Power Violence and more straightforward hardcore. And then over the past maybe 10 years have really just kind of elevated themselves with each release. I was there for the Isolation 10-year anniversary at the Metro, or I'm sorry, at the Sub T a few years back. Rust, maybe the band isn't as stoked about that record as I was, but I was a fan. I was definitely a fan. That was kind of where I got into them more so. And then
Posthuman rolls out.
Posthuman was just
machine head riffs aplenty.
Kind of like what we talked about with the Cattle episode is like, as far as like, wow, this record, this is crazy. I mean, I think they even had almost like a little EP where like members of, I think Justin Broderick of like Godflesh did some remixes as well as some other individuals. But I was excited when that record came out, but what I was excited for was, okay, wow, this is clearly a new era of the band. What's going to come next? And so you have Common Suffering. I can't say enough good things about it. At the time of the Terminator timeline, it literally came out yesterday. So I've run through it a few times. It's a quick listen. It's like 34 minutes. I mean, listen to really
with the singles that dropped for this, I was really stoked for it.
Yeah. I mean, the song with Chris Esfandiari of King Woman Undertow is great. But I mean, really the stuff that you haven't gotten to yet. Wanderer is kind of again, we were mentioning about the Cattle record where it's like, wow, this almost could have been written by a different band in a way. It's like kind of epic sounding. It's not anything I've really ever heard that band do before. But you have Sadist Guilt, a really standout track on it, Heaven's Call. Again, I really can't say enough good things about this band. Clearly, in the time since the pandemic and now, there's been so much effort, and energy applied to what is going to be the finished product of this record. And I know they worked with Will Yep, who's known for working with a variety of different bands like Turnstile and the like. But this is special. They're going to be embarking on tour. The Chicago show is sold out. I'm going to be there, and I'm sure I'll be talking about it in the future. But check it out. It's out now everywhere, so there's no excuse for you not to listen. We've been doing these Cattle episodes basically. This is all we've had. So much time to focus on. I haven't really been listening to a lot of heavy music outside of the New Harm's Way record and some stuff for the show. But I have been watching movies, and I wanted to talk about a movie that I haven't ever seen. You may know it from meme form a handful of years ago, but there's a Nick Cage movie by the name of Vampire's Kiss.
Oh man, what a wild fucking movie.
Yeah, dude. I did not expect this movie to be what it was.
A, B, C, D.
Oh, so many different things stylistically that I don't even know where to begin. But, it's basically Halloween's begun. To tie in Swindle again, who we need to have back on this show. I'm sure we will in the future.
Yes.
Every year for the past handful of years, we will watch like a horror movie basically every day. We've gotten our list selected. But to kind of begin things early, my partner and I started with this movie. I was not prepared. For what I got. It is just borderline absurd. Vampire movie, black comedy. I don't know how you would describe it. It kind of reminded me of, in certain parts, of a movie that George Romero did called Martin.
God.
That movie is also very dark and bleak and ridiculous. But really, what is so insane about this film, as with many Nick Cage films, is his performance. Some of the styles of, like, he just has an accent for no reason. Like a Transylvanian, kind of like maybe his take on a Vincent Price sort of like transatlantic sort of.
It's remarkable that you mentioned that, because like Renfield isn't a great film, but he does a good job in
yes.
He does that great Bela Lugosi schlocky like accent.
Someone should do a deep dive of that guy's filmography if they haven't already. I don't know if I have the strength.
I've seen The Vampire's Kiss one time, and it's as close to being a Coen's brother film without being a Coen brothers film. I saw Raising Arizona for the first time just
love that
six months ago.
So
it was on YouTube. I was like, I'm watching this, and phenomenal.
It's great.
Again, great bonkers Nick Cage film. I think Nick Cage is going to go down as one of those great character actors. In general, I think he is. Like, I could definitely give you some suggestions of Nick Cage movies to watch just for pure enjoyment out of that. But yeah, that's a great one. It's Halloween season, man. It's on the cusp of it.
I'm excited to get into it. What do you got for me this week? What have you been getting into?
You dropped a movie. I got to drop a movie.
Yeah.
So my partner and I actually just watched a Hulu original called No One Will Save You.
Oh, okay.
It's an alien movie. There's little to no dialogue in it.
Interesting.
But it's just a really great alien abduction movie, almost like a Twilight Zone episode. And it's like the aliens are the big gray ones with the big eyes. Like it's a lot of fun. This is up there with like Prey and the most recent Hellraiser reboot for like Hulu originals that are really good. This is a really fun, it's PG-13, so like anybody can watch it, but there's points in it that are absolutely terrifying. I mean, the way the aliens are depicted in it are great. It's worth a watch. It's a quick watch too. Like it's hour 27 with no dialogue. It had me pulled in the entire movie. I am so looking forward to like, you know, All Hallows Eve kicking in. I'm looking forward to watching all like the horror movies. I know my partner and I are going to dive into the most recent Castlevania series that just dropped within a couple days ago. We're looking forward to that. But album-wise, I did get a little bit of time to listen to a couple heavy things here recently. The Tech Slam band Wormhole put out an album called Almost Human, and it is absolutely great. There's a couple cheesy kind of neckbeard samples on it with like, there's a SpongeBob sample in it. But like, it is still fun, just like great rad shit. That dropped out on Season of Mist Records. It's about a 26-minute listen, so it's like, it's a good poop or a good walk around the neighborhood. I also want to touch on, and this is a pretty controversial one. If you're a bigot, if you are a piece of crap, if you are, you know, against people being able to live the life that they want to live and feel comfortable in their skin, there's no room for you in this community. And I have been a fan of Thy Art Is Murder for quite some time. Luckily, they have kicked out their vocalist who had some very, very difficult comments that he made about certain things, and they have since enlisted the vocalist from another Australian band called Aversion Crown. So their new album, Godlike, is really, really good. It's really well performed, kind of technical death metal. So if you own a physical copy of the album, it is going to have the original vocalist on it. But if you listen digitally, you get the new vocalist. So you kind of get to see what it sounds like with both vocalists. Hopefully you get a production of the album with the new vocalist on it, because I was really surprised at how well those vocals sound on it. Really great record. It's going to be marred by some really bad stuff, though, sadly, but a good record nonetheless.
That's what we got for you this week. Thank you so much for joining us as we've embarked on a multi-episode journey into the world of Cattle Decapitation. Check out their tour schedule. If it is coming through a city near you, I would highly recommend it. I hope we get to see this tour take place. Dylan, I'm just a phone call or a little drive away there, bud.
Will to travel.
You never write, you never visit. Your peepaw misses you.
It has been about, it's October of 21. Last time
we have not seen each other in person since we've started this podcast at all.
Because you were down for my birthday this year, so it's been quite some time after that.
Quite some time, but we'll make it happen. And you should make this happen. Follow us at Distortion 891, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for all updates on the show, as well as our live show, which airs every Monday, 6 p.m. Central on WONC FM 89. We'll see you next week. We're going to be talking about some more riffs. You've been listening to Riff Worship. Bloop, bloop.